I knew something was wrong.
Courage the Cowardly Dog is such an interesting and unique show. Its premise was so different from every other show that was on Cartoon Network at the time, and that allowed them to capture a very special kind of atmosphere that not many other shows could capture. It's one of my all-time favorites. Recently, I've found myself very intrigued and curious about one character in particular though, and that would be none other than Eustace. Not too long ago, I made a video about the Tower of Dr. Zalost, an episode encompassing depression and how its effects can hit you like a ton of bricks. Just in case you missed that video, I'll have it linked down in the description box below so you can check it out after this one. That episode was not only a true masterpiece from start to finish as far as a consumable piece of media goes, but it also gave us a very complex look at Eustace and his overall emotional state. This really got me thinking about how deep the writers of this show truly made his character. Now, I plan to dive more into Eustace as a person further over time, but for right now, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna check out a very iconic early episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog that would see Eustace shown in a way that wouldn't ever really be seen again. Before we dive into it though, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here, and of course for clicking on this video. I recently hit a massive milestone of 150,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and just the thought of that blows my mind. I cannot thank you all enough for your support and for being a part of my YouTube journey. I really hope you enjoy this video. Today we're looking at none other than the Queen of the Black Puddle. This episode begins on a mysteriously red stormy day at the farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Inside, Muriel is rocking in her rocking chair with Courage in her lap as Eustace reads his newspaper. As they all sit peacefully, Eustace, out of nowhere, dons a pair of weird lips with sharp teeth as he spontaneously scares Courage nearly half to death. Courage goes flying out to the porch as we hear Muriel give Eustace a big old bonk with her rolling pin. As Courage stands outside catching his breath after that good scare, he finds himself drawn to an ominous, bubbling, dark puddle that's on the ground nearby. Courage runs inside and he tries to warn his family, but unfortunately they don't really understand him, so he decides to pick up Muriel and drag her outside himself to show her firsthand what he saw. When he gets to the puddle, however, there seems to be nothing out of the ordinary.
Oh, Courage, it must have been a fish. Nothing to worry about.
Later on, we see Eustace and Muriel sitting in the living room while Courage watches the puddle through the window in fear. Eustace sips his tea as he reads his paper, and Muriel walks into the kitchen, deciding that she herself also could use a nice cup of tea.
What's that dripping sound?
As this mysterious goth lady in Eustace's tea attempts to lure him in, Courage runs to get some help. Unfortunately though, before he arrives with Muriel, the tea lady has disappeared.
Are you all right, Eustace?
What? Yeah. Darn herbal teas.
The kitchen ceiling's leaking again, Eustace. You'd better go fix it.
Go fix it, Eustace. Better fix it, Eustace. Can't even fix a cup of tea.
As Eustace stands there complaining about his wife, we hear the voice of the woman calling for him again. Just then, one of the water drops coming from the ceiling turns into her as she sprays him with her mysterious liquid yet again. Courage walks in on this happening, and again he goes to get Muriel. However, when they get back, just like before, they find him slumped into a soft puddle of mush. Muriel decides that she's gonna put Eustace to bed because he seems a little under the weather. Before you know it though, we cut to Eustace starting himself a bath. As he sits there scrubbing, we see the woman appear in his bath and stand before him. Courage walks through the door right as she's dumping a bucket of liquid on Eustace, and he quickly runs to get Muriel's help.
Oh my, I'm beginning to worry about you, Eustace. Tomorrow we're off to see the doctor. That's all there is to it.
Later that night, the family is sleeping in bed peacefully when, little do they know, outside, the puddle is starting to slowly ripple as the strange and ominous purple-haired woman ascends from its depths, and she heads right into their house. We see her approach Eustace and Muriel's door, and this happens.
This can't be happening.
Eustace.
We see the queen of the puddle go back to where she came from with Eustace in her arms as Courage watches from the upstairs window, just completely in awe of what he's seen. He stands there in the same exact spot and doesn't move a muscle until the next morning when he goes downstairs to find Muriel crying her eyes out.
Eustace is gone. Oh, my Eustace. I knew something was wrong.
No matter what Courage tries, Muriel just wants Eustace back. He decides that he has no choice but to dive down into the black puddle and bring Eustace back home. As Courage stands before the puddle, he realizes that it's shrinking smaller and smaller by the minute. Feeling the pressure of time, he dives down and traverses through the depths of the mysterious underwater world. As he swims past a sunken ship and buried treasure, he finds himself stumbling upon a massive castle surrounded by skeletons. He peeks in the window and finds the woman doing a dance for Eustace. She reaches into a nearby treasure chest and she pulls out a necklace.
Why does that look familiar?
Courage, thinking on his feet, swims right over to the sunken ship from before, and he grabs the pole coming off of the tip of it, which just so happens to have a rope and hook attached to the end. Courage swims back to the castle, and he uses it as a fishing pole to grab Eustace by the ankle of his pajamas and drag him to safety. Courage swims for his life, dragging Eustace behind him, with the monster in hot pursuit. She almost gets them a couple times here. However, Courage comes up with a clever plan as he swims his way back into the castle with Eustace. As she angrily tries to fight her way out of the clamshell, Courage swims out of the castle with Eustace, and he heads up for the entrance to the puddle in a race against the clock. The monster breaks out of the shell, and not long after that, we hear the roaring of her approaching as the entrance to the puddle begins to close quicker and quicker. Courage swims at full speed towards the opening, but unfortunately for him and Eustace, it closes right before they can get through it. Seconds after that, though, Courage is thankful to find another puddle not too far off in the direction of the house.
Eustace! Courage!
Muriel holds Eustace in her arms, just so thankful to have him back. Then, seconds later, she pulls out her rolling pin and gives him a smack as she asks where he's been, but of course, he's just as confused as she is. Later on that night, while Eustace and Muriel are in bed, we see Courage in the bathtub cleaning off when this happens. I just have to take a quick sec to say that I just have so many great memories of watching this episode as a kid. Courage is a show that I've watched every episode of over and over again throughout the years, and honestly, this episode always hits so hard, and it always has. I mean, the entire premise of this one is just pure gold, and the presentation here is phenomenal. Taking it from the top, the title card was just so fitting for this episode, all things considered. From the colors used to the ominous representation of the black puddle, it was just a perfect way to set the tone for this episode. I always loved how this show was so great at that. Typically, they knock it out of the park as far as atmospheric music and title cards go. Moving on from there, I never really considered this before, but in hindsight, it's kind of odd that Courage brought Muriel outside to check out this freaky puddle, and her answer to it scaring him is that there was probably a fish in it. Like, how would that even be possible? I mean, even if that was the case, they should probably be concerned as to how a fish just mysteriously fell from the sky with the rain. By all means, cartoon logic would completely permit it, but still, considering this was Muriel's justification as to why this was a normal situation, it was just kind of ironic when you think about it. Now, the entire premise of this episode, though, like I said, is golden. In this one, we see the farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, which was just drenched in a massive downpour of rain from a mysterious red storm, being preyed upon by a strange woman who has the power to manipulate and take form through any water source, be it a bathtub or just a cup of tea. She can teleport virtually anywhere through water, and on top of that, she has the power to manipulate any man into being completely infatuated with her. When we take into account the hauntingly alluring sound of her voice calling Eustace, her underwater castle, and the endless amount of skeletons surrounding her stomping grounds, it's very clear that all of this boils down to her being a siren. Now, if you're not familiar with siren lore, the idea of them originally came from the Odyssey, but in the story, they were originally characterized by the sound of their alluring voices, and Homer, the author, never really gave a description as for the appearance of the mysterious creatures. It was more or less left up to the reader's imagination. Throughout the passing centuries, sirens would be given various different depictions and forms, but in theory, a decent portion of them would be relatively similar to that of what we would see in this episode. A creature that's portrayed as beautiful both aesthetically and verbally, who uses that to lure in its prey, typically a man. In this episode, this is portrayed in such a freaky way. In most siren lore, we see them use their singing to lure in sailors or other unsuspecting men to their death. The men usually end up going willingly though, because of the attractive noises drawing their attention to what they believe is a beautiful woman. However, this siren is one that hunts her prey as opposed to letting the prey come to her. She still has that same allure that a traditional siren would, except instead of getting her prey to follow her, it more or less sedates them to a point where she can do whatever she wants to them. On top of her being a hunter in nature though, she has these further mystical abilities. I thought it was really clever that the writers of the show decided to make it so that she can manipulate water the way that she does. It really adds an extra layer of tension here, and it kind of exacerbates that helpless and unable to escape her temptation kind of feeling. I mean, this woman can stalk their entire family whenever she wants. She could easily eavesdrop on their conversations through a cup of tea on the table or through the water in the sink while Muriel does the dishes. She's able to use her tricks to her advantage to get people like Eustace in a position where they don't stand a chance against her. What's even more insane about this though is when we keep in mind that she can do this literally anywhere. I mean, she just showed up in the middle of nowhere of all places. They're straight up hundreds of miles from any substantial body of water. Yet, that doesn't stop her because she doesn't even need a big body of water. She can use something as simple as a wet rug from Muriel's tears shed over her missing husband. Now, I definitely want to point out that at first glance, one might look at this episode and think that Eustace was easily swayed into cheating on his wife. However, when we keep in mind the incredible influence that this siren had over him, he couldn't have made a choice to cheat or not, even if he wanted to. When she works that siren spell on him, all bets are off, and he's basically hers to mold into whatever she wants. And unfortunately, she wants to mold him into a tasty meal for her. Now, one thing that I definitely wanted to bring up as it relates to this episode is the whole aspect of the siren spraying water in Eustace's face and, well, the noises he made in response to it. If you watch his facial reactions, it's clear that she gets his attention and he is infatuated, but when she sprays him with that water, he ends up like completely losing all control. It seemed like they were implying that this liquid was what lured him in, almost as if it was her magic elixir, but again, the whole sequence just kind of felt a little suggestive, if you know what I mean. It was kind of odd. I did get a really good kick though out of the first time that it happened, and Eustace wakes up from the trance blaming it on them darn herbal teas. That was absolutely hilarious, and if it was the tea, then I mean, hey, I'll have what he's having. Continuing on the siren though, it was insane how ominously they portrayed her intentions. Like how they show her straight up breaking into the farmhouse in the middle of the night to full-blown kidnap Eustace while he's dead asleep. Or how they showed hundreds of skeletons scattered everywhere, all wearing the same exact necklace as Eustace. Of course, by all means, it doesn't take long to connect the dots as to what happens to all of the men that this monster lures into her den. The necklace, though, is one thing that I really found very intriguing. As a plot point, it was used to make us as viewers connect the dots that the siren was going to eat Eustace, but my conspiracy theorist brain can't help but want to dig just a tiny bit further into this. Now, I know that the siren's song, elixir, and her charm in general are what lure people in and keep them sedated. However, you'd think as soon as she changes form into that big-mouthed beast, maybe her victims would start to show maybe some fear and lose interest? With that being said though, I've written it as my own official headcanon that the necklaces are enchanted and they're kind of like the final linchpin that locks her spell into place. The necklace makes it so that its wearer is in such a heightened state of euphoria that when they see her as a monster, all they see still in their mind is her attractive form that she presents to them in an effort to lure them in. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Otherwise, why would she spend so much time making so many of these necklaces just to murder the person wearing it and leave it on their body? We already know that she's capable of some serious magic, so who's to say that she can't enchant things as well? Going in a different direction though, I can't help but wonder what drew the Siren there in the first place. Like we already covered, there isn't really any major bodies of water anywhere near here. On top of that, there aren't really any other men around here save for Eustace. It's overall kind of slim pickings for her around this area, and the only thing that I can think of is Eustace being how he is drawing her in. Like, it could possibly be the kind of situation where this Siren hunts her prey based on the amount of negativity towards their wife that they display. Like, that much negativity building up in one place kind of acts as a beacon to draw her in. I imagine it kind of like how they portray in ghost movies, where, like, enough negative energy in one place can manifest a poltergeist, or it can open a portal, which will result in a ton of negative spirits coming through, being drawn by all of that negative energy confined to one space. In this case, though, instead of general negative energy, it's the negative way that Eustace perceives Muriel, as seen by this scene where he's talking bad about her.
Go fix it, Eustace. Better fix it, Eustace. Can't even fix a cup of tea.
By all means, I'm likely reading too far into it, but it definitely could be explained by how palpable Eustace's feelings towards Muriel are. The really sad thing about it, though, is that on the other side of the coin, regardless of how much of a jerk Eustace can be, Muriel is just so unendingly head over heels in love with him. I mean, when she woke up in the morning and he was just gone, she was completely distraught. She cried nonstop until he was back home. This right here says a lot about them as a couple, and it really exemplifies their dynamic. She's the one who can actually show some love and compassion, as well as take care of her partner. Meanwhile, he's an emotional brick wall who expects her to wait on him hand and foot because he's the, quote, farmer who provides for the family. But like, did you ever notice how there isn't any crops on their farm? This guy doesn't do anything, yet still he expects Muriel to basically be his servant while he treats her like garbage. There's so much to say about Eustace, and there is actually some fair context throughout this show that could likely explain why he is how he is as a person. But again, that's another story for a very long video diving deep into Eustace's character. Now, as far as this episode goes though, there are a few other things that I definitely wanted to share my appreciation for. First of all, this particular shot right here of the moon in the background super close to their house. This is just such a compelling image, and it definitely sets the scene so perfectly. It just kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about the title card colors and atmosphere. This is another great example of how that tone continues throughout this episode. The juxtaposition of the red moon in the background against the purple night sky, and the brown house against the dark ground. It's just such a gorgeous use of color, and personally, I really enjoy it. But the icing on the cake, though, is how they transition from that shot to this right here. That jump from the red and purple colors in the last shot to the deep greens in the hallway here is just so captivating. Like, if I dig enough in the recesses of my memory, I swear I can recall waking up in my dark bedroom as a kid, having fallen asleep watching TV, and seeing the reflection of these colors on my walls, and just being mesmerized by the clashing of deep colors coming from the screen painting the white walls of my bedroom in their deep hues. And at that point, I didn't even realize I was waking up to Courage the Cowardly Dog because I was still half asleep. In this particular memory, the joy of realizing that show is what was on TV was the icing on the cake. This show always did a really phenomenal job of setting tone via colors, and that's something that I can't commend enough due to how strategically they utilized it. Another point where this was on display front and center is the very first scene in this episode where we see the farmhouse getting hit by that deep red and orange storm. It's just such a bizarre and strange use of color because most people don't associate storms with deep red hues, but I'm definitely picking up on the vibe that they're putting down and I totally dig it. I also have so much appreciation for the use of CGI in this show. Throughout the series, they would sprinkle it in little by little, only in spots where it benefited the creepy or weird factor. In this one, the only bit of CGI we see is when Courage finally escapes the Siren and we see her hit her head on the floor, causing the floor to bump up a little bit. This was such a small and subtle thing, but after literally watching an entire 10-minute episode of standard flat animation, to see just a tiny hair of 3D CGI thrown in at the very end felt like such an odd and out-of-nowhere effect. Yet, it didn't fail to add a bit of creep factor just for the simple fact that it was so unexpectedly executed. If there's anything else that I want to bring up as we wind down to the conclusion here, it would be the ending of this episode. Seeing Courage in the bathtub only for that freaky siren dog to appear always left my mind racing and imagining what comes next. As a kid, this always made me want another episode like this one, except instead of Eustace, it's Courage being lured into the monster's den. The plot twist of there being a dog siren at the end was completely unexpected, and it felt so original. It's also fitting, considering that Courage technically is the only other guy out there on the farm. In conclusion, there's just so much that I love about this episode. It's one that really sticks out in Season 1 of Courage for many reasons. The overall feel and theme of this episode lends a lot to it, but also the creativity poured into constructing this villain. By all means, I feel like nearly every villain in this show was highly fleshed out and created with a very out-of-the-box kind of approach, but the Queen of the Black Puddle in particular was a very unique and iconic one. Furthermore, this episode is one that I truly find interesting because the light that it portrayed Eustace in is one that wouldn't ever really be revisited again. In this one, he's seen as the monster's end goal as she tries to seduce him and effectively steal him from Muriel. That just wouldn't be a common thing for this show, as Eustace, if we're being honest, was never really seen as that hot of a commodity. But what do you guys think? Did you ever think it was odd seeing an episode where they kind of portrayed Eustace being stolen from Muriel? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, I have to give a jumbo shout out to my friends over on Patreon, especially those of you in the true 90s kids tier. You guys mean so much to me and I really appreciate you more than words could ever say. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and give a little bit of praise to the algorithm in hopes that it pushes this one to everyone else. And as always, thank every last one of you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.